we have Martin Levy, Hurricane Electric, and we also have from the Kenyan iHub, we have Paul with us. I'm just waiting on confirmation that my slides are put up there. Sorry, I submitted them very last minute. I don't really have statistics for World IPv6 launch per se. However, what I will be showing is some of the trends that's been happening in the African region over the years in terms of IPv6, both allocation and advertisement. So first of all, I'm told we have them, yes. So could I get control of the slide, please? So first of all, this will show you, this graph will show you in terms of IPv6 allocation in the African region. So as you can see, all the way up to 2009, we only gave an average of 15/32s. However, starting 2010, that number jumped to actually be 55/32s, and in 2011, that number jumped up to 129. This year still hasn't been over yet, but we're up to 44/32s in the region. So just by looking at that graph, we can actually see a dramatic jump in terms of networks and LIRs and ISPs in the region that are getting more and more aware of IPv6 and the necessity to start working with IPv6 and getting their IPv6 allocations. Of course, allocation isn't everything. You need to also start advertising them. So, sorry. So next graph shows actually the percentage of ASNs announcing IPv6 in Africa. And also in this graph, you can see that since 2010, we were around 5.5% of AFRINIC ASNs were advertising IPv6 prefixes. However, in 2012, that number jumped up till 12.12, which is around a 200% increase in terms of networks that are advertising and can be seen over IPv6 on the internet. Also to be noted, the current worldwide percentage of ASNs announcing IPv6 is 13.85. This is of this morning. So we are more or less in Africa, following with the global ranges. Of course, we'd like to see these numbers going up more. However, we aren't too far behind. Having said that, I'll give the floor now to my next presenter, which would be Phil. That will give us more perspective of World IPv6 launch, the reasons behind, and the outcomes they found out of that. So, Phil?
Hi, can everybody hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. I see that I'm the presenter. I'm not sure what will happen. Let me see if I can. Nope. Well, I'm not sure exactly how to pull my presentation up, so maybe it would make sense if somebody else is the presenter and drives the presentation.
Hi, Phil. Just click on Phil at the top next to the agenda of the tablet and Phil.
I don't see that on my window. Just a second. I got it. Excellent. Thanks. Hi, everybody. I want to talk a little bit about World IPv6 launch, what we tried to accomplish, what we think we accomplished, and where we think we're going with this in the near future. Let's see. Oops, wrong one. Not sure exactly how to advance the slide here.
Just below the agenda tab, there are arrows for left and right and 01. Just click on the right, the one point to the right.
I see. There we go. All right. Hopefully I can get through this now. So why did we do this? We have three motivations of doing this: to accelerate adoption, to encourage adoption, and to set a definition in the Internet. The idea is that now that World IPv6 launch has happened, IPv6 is part of the regular business of the Internet for many, many users, for many access networks, for many websites, for home router makers who are now shipping product with IPv6 on by default. And the idea is that people will be using IPv6 without having to do anything special. You don't have to go configure any equipment. You don't have to ask for anything from your ISP or from your network provider, and you don't have to click or enter a special URL for a website. The hope was that it would drive acceleration with people who are already planning on doing IPv6, and we heard that from many network operators. You'll see some measurements that we took that show what network operators managed to do. Many people told us that this effort enabled them to accelerate timelines within their own companies. There are networks who did not make the goal, who said, you know, we're sad that we didn't make the goal, but it certainly helped us drive adoption quicker within our company, and we hope to provide V6 on a large scale by the end of this year. So we're very pleased that it did enable people to accelerate their deployments. We hope that it encouraged people to adopt V6 who weren't already planning to do so. And we've heard from a few people that it has encouraged them to do more than they had wanted. We haven't heard from a lot who have said we weren't going to do anything and now we are. You know, I think part of that is that, you know, many people now, I don't know if it's say most people now, but many people in the network operator space and in the website space have already made a decision that they're going to get onto V6, and it's just a matter of time. And lastly, we think we were successful at saying that there's a new definition of what the Internet is, and it is a network with V4 and V6. It's growing, it's part of regular business, and we're happy to see that that's taking place. So what did access networks do? There's a list of access networks at the top. These are the companies that were on our initial press release, and they made two commitments. One is that new subscribers would get V6 on by default, that no user configuration would be needed. And second, that they would reach a number in their own deployment where that 1% of the visits coming to big websites from those networks would be using IPv6 by the 6th of June. And we measured this. Well, Google, Facebook, and Yahoo measured it, and we reported on it. And this is clearly a serious commitment from access networks. You'll see the long list in just a minute that I'm going to put up. And there are many others who have told us that, yes, we're going to do this, and they just didn't get as much done as our goals were for the 6th of June. But I'm happy to report that we're going to continue doing the measurements through the end of this year. And if you're already signed up and you get to that goal, we will display it, and we'll track progress for people who are already committed. And hopefully there will be some additional folks who sign up and who make a commitment to get V6 up. Here's a graph. I don't know how easy it is for you to see. It's not terribly easy for me to see on my screen. But it shows the results of the network operator measurements that we conducted on the 6th of June. And this is a graph from, I think it finally all got collected and displayed by about the 11th of June. But We did these measurements on the first full 24 hours that Google, Facebook, and Yahoo were running IPv6 on their websites. And on the left, it shows participating network. It shows their AS list and the percentage of IPv6 traffic that was measured. That percentage is a simple average of what Google, Facebook, and Yahoo saw, and anybody who had at least 0.1% is on that list. And I'm actually not sure all of them are displayed on the graph, but if you go to the website, you can see the full list and you can see notes about how the measurements were conducted. But clearly it shows that there are a lot of people deploying IPv6, and the graph on the right with the shading shows a sort of map by number of users where it shows where V6 deployment is taking place. If the map showed percentage, it would be a little bit different with Romania and France in the lead because they have the highest percentage penetration in their countries. But this is a graph of numbers of users. Home router vendors also participated. Cisco and D-Link initially. We had a few other home router vendors join. Again, it's IPv6 as part of regular business. Their commitment was that a majority of their products that were shipping by now are shipping with V6 on by default. No configuration necessary. And we did interoperability testing. Well, we didn't. UNH-IOL did interoperability testing to verify that people met a sort of minimal level of V6 quality deployment. So it's a great start. Cisco and D-Link are a big chunk of the market, but a lot remains to be done. Websites, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Bing initially, Yahoo, all agreed to make IPv6 available on their main websites, and they did. A bunch of others signed up and let us know. 2,300 websites are registered and turned up IPv6. It's on the main website, so you don't have to type in a specific IPv6 URL to get IPv6 from these websites. So if you're on an IPv6 capable device, on an IPv6 capable network, when you go to one of these websites, you'll get IPv6. So it's clearly true now that big content is available over IPv6. Google, Facebook, YouTube, Yahoo, the 4 most visited websites in the world according to Alexa. Wikipedia is very close. Netflix shifts a lot of bits in a lot of places. And as a matter of fact, over 10% of the Alexa top 1,000 sites serve IPv6 now. Alexa measures most visited websites around the world. It ranks them worldwide and in particular countries. And 10% of the top 1,000, according to their rankings, are serving IPv6 now. Here's another graph showing IPv6 deployment in sample sets. You can see in June of last year there was a spike of websites turning up IPv6. And in June of this year there's another spike, but the good news about this year is that those are all going up. There was not a turn it on and turn it off phenomenon this year. It was turn it on, leave it on. That was the ask. Traffic. Here are a couple of measurements. This is AMSIX and DKIX showing IPv6 traffic across their exchanges. Looks like roughly doubled as a result of the effort this year. And another thing that I want to talk about, which isn't part of the World IPv6 launch activities, but it's something that people can sign up for if they're a network operator and they would like to. We are tracking deployments for all sorts of networks. The World IPv6 launch, what we are tracking is what Google, Facebook, and Yahoo can measure on IPv6. We know there are other people doing IPv6 deployments, and if you go to this website, you can see instructions about how to contribute information about your deployment. Again, it's separate from the World IPv6 launch activities. This is continuous and ongoing. For World IPv6 launch, if you're a network operator, If you haven't signed up, go register your network. And if Google, Facebook, and Yahoo see it as measurable, and even 0.1% of traffic coming from the network showing up at their websites will plot you in the measurements. We'll be doing that through the end of this year. But this V6 heat map is something separate that will be ongoing, and we'll track whatever kind of information people contribute. And that is all that I have to say. Are there questions? And I'm not sure what I should do now, so.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. We'll probably take questions at the end of all presentations. If you could right-click next to your name and pass the presenter role to me. While you do that, I'll introduce the next speaker. Christian will be giving us an update from what France Telecom has been able to see and the statistics that they were able to gather from World IPv6 launch. Christian, I'll pass the presenter role to you.
Thank you, Isham. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Christian Jacquemin speaking. I'm the head of the IPv6 program, which has been launched by France Telecom in 2008, and this is a program which aims at defining the group's IPv6 strategy, but also to accompany the different group affiliates in enforcing this strategy. So the presentation I've prepared for this IPv6 webinar is really short indeed. It's obviously mostly focused on a couple of African partners and affiliates who have been actively involved in the promotion of IPv6 for the past month. So I will just very briefly introduce what happened at the level of the France Telecom group, and then we'll essentially focus on the information which is being consolidated from Sonatel on one side, which is our partner in Senegal, and Orange Uganda on the other side. I can see that my colleague Simon is actually with us today. So Simon, if you want to further elaborate once I get to the Uganda slot, please be my guest. So in terms of group participation itself, June 6th was actually the opportunity for 7 affiliates and partners to switch the IPv6 button on. So you've got the list of the major group affiliates and partners who have now activated IPv6 not only in the network infrastructure but also in the portal. So we've got our colleagues from Orange Armenia in the far east of Europe, Orange France, and mostly the portal which is connected to the French domestic backbone, which is now IPv6 enabled. And as a matter of fact, the chart that you can see on this slide reflects the amount of IPv6 traffic which has been observed on the Orange portal. I'll get back briefly to this. And also in France, my colleagues from Orange Business Services, who have opened the IPv6 VPN service offering since May 2009, have made sure that the global Orange Business portal is now IPv6 reachable in addition to being IPv4 reachable. We had also our colleagues from Orange Moldova, Orange Poland, which is one of our major affiliates who will be opening the IPv6 connectivity service at the end of this year for their fixed customers. As far as their mobile customers are concerned, this is something that should happen in October. We are currently running some large-scale IPv6 testing in this country to make sure everything will be up and running in due time. And last but not least, my colleagues from Sonatel for Senegal, as well as Orange Uganda, have also participated to the IPv6 world launch, which means that, as Phil already mentioned, IPv6 is now on, and since then, and the next month will actually be the opportunity to welcome more partners who hopefully will be able to register to the ISOC website. I'm especially thinking about my colleagues from Jordan Telecom, who have now their IPv6 network ready, and we are working with them to deploy the IPv6 connectivity service during the second half of this year for their ADSL customers. So a slight comment on the graph that you can see on this slide. This is again a graph which reflects the amount of IPv6 traffic that has been observed since the IPv6 reachability of the French portal is available. So the good news is that we observe an average several megabits of IPv6 traffic coming in and coming out from the Orange portal. The bad news is that this traffic actually comes from the customers who are subscribed to our competitors, so namely the free customers, but also the other two major competitors in France, which are SFR on one side and Bouygues Telecom on the other side. This is obviously because the IPv6 service is not open for our customers in France yet. This is because of the current IPv4, global IPv4 address depletion, meaning that we will be opening this service during the first half of 2014. But yet the backbone is ready, and we've got some IPv6 traffic running on the Orange portal. So now moving to our colleagues from Africa. First of all, let's start with Sonatel. So based upon the information that has been shared by my colleagues Modousa and Samba, I'm not sure they're with us today, but this is the statistics that they have observed so far. So mostly a worldwide access, and most of the hits have been observed from Senegal and mostly the Senegalese academics, because there is a specific IPv6 video conferencing service which has been opened for the University of Saint-Louis du Sénégal and the University of Dakar. So we include these customers in the people who have accessed the IPv6 enabled Sonatel portal. And then, as per the graph that you can possibly guess on the left-hand side of the slide, the number 2 in terms of IPv6 visitors was China with 90 hits. So on average, Sonatel currently observed an average of 300 hits per day, and now I think they have reached the 10,000 hits bar as we speak, and an average of 30 sessions plus per user. So we are currently working with Sonatel in igniting what we call the phase 2 of the IPv6 project, which will mostly focus on the activation of IPv6 multicast capabilities in light of the forthcoming IPv6-based e-learning services that Sonatel plan to provide for some of their customers, and this is something which will be arranged in collaboration with Renater in France, Renater being the French National Research Network, which is also a very active IPv6 participant. Last, Orange Uganda. So Orange Uganda portal has actually been activated back in June 29th, so it's quite recent. There were some IPv6 prefix announcement issues which have been observed, and meaning that the website could not be accessed from any part of the internet until very recently. And if Simon is with us today, maybe he can confirm that this issue has now been fixed. So as per the statistics that have been provided to me so far by my colleagues from Orange Uganda, we observed 10 IPv6 connections from mostly free IPv6 addresses, and obviously we'll be happy to share more statistics once the global reachability will be up and running. So that's basically it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian, for that. Also, if you can pass me the presentation ball while I introduce the next speaker, which is Martin Levy from Hurricane Electric. I'm sure all of you that have been dealing with IPv6 have heard about Hurricane Electric so far, but if you haven't, Martin, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Loud and clear.
Let's get my slide up here. I am pulling this off on an iPad. So the question is, does the app have the slide capability for me? And it doesn't look like it does. Happy if somebody would bring the slides up for me.
I'll do that. Christian, could you just pass me the presentations? And Martin, if you just, when you say next slide, I'll pass through them. Christian, if you can right-click on your name and pass me the presentation.
Oh, okay.
The presenter. Thank you. Go ahead, Martin.
Okay. Well, I would say good morning. I realize actually for me in California, it's very much good morning, and for everybody else, it's a good afternoon. I would like to do this IPv6 review from a global point of view, which is very much how we see the IPv6 world at Hurricane Electric. The good news is that as we have said for many years, the global connectivity, the backbone side of the equation for V6 has been actually in good shape for quite some time. Let's hit the next slide. I've got a few stats I'm going to share, one of which has already been shared, and I will delve into it a little deeper. So first off, you know, all these are a set of graphs that are showing positive trends. We've been measuring for an awful long time this global measurement of the number of ASNs that have enabled V6. Again, this is very much a backbone mindset. And in this measurement, you will see that we have continued to rise month over month for many years. Taking the graph back any further than this, as you may guess, is a very shallow graph. But there are three events here that show exactly what is happening globally. First of all, IANA runout, now a year and a half ago, was when we started to do the first upswing. And in reality, that upswing was compounded and improved by the fact that the World V6 Day 2011 was also announced. This got the first set of people highly motivated to do V6. Over and above the classic sort of network engineer, people who were aware of this, who were doing V6, there was definitely a lot more interest. And you can see that upswing through World V6 Day. You see an upswing after that, the press releases and the like, but then you see a lull. And this is sort of pretty classic human nature. The next upswing that we saw, although not quite the same, was when we saw World V6 launch sort of kick in and where we are today. We measure as of today about 14% of ASNs running V6. But this stat is not exactly showing what you need to see. Because if you delve into this, you start to notice that backbone ASNs, large telco ASNs in countries where there's lots of multi-homing are starting to get enabled V6. This is a good thing. So it turns out there are a lot of ASNs out there, a lot of networks, which you could consider sub or edge networks. And it's at those numbers where you start to see less deployment at V6 on the backbone level. And keep in mind, this is purely a measurement of deployment. It's a measurement of the ability to route V6. It's not a measurement of whether a CPE equipment has been to an end user. But it does show, as I said, a positive trend. And we pull these numbers apart and look at them on a per country basis and on a per backbone basis. The number of multi-homed ASs, which is very high in the V6 world, versus the versus sort of edge one. If I can take the next slide, please. Oh, sorry, and the next slide, we don't need to say that one. So this is now getting down to sort of one of the more interesting graphs. On Hurricane Electric Backbone, we have been measuring sick traffic, obviously, for a very long time. And we've seen these two very significant events change the global view of how much V6 traffic is out there. And although this graph has always been published without a y-axis, a trick we learned from Google, we're talking many, many gigs of traffic here, you know, measured in gigs and tens of gigs, because we are measuring at the backbone on a backbone that has a lot of V6 connectivity. The two events that you see are actually marked quite different. First one, World V6A last year, saw this instant jump. And in fact, if you were to zoom in on that graph, you would see it zoom in and actually jump up by a factor of 5. It then settled back down again. There was a key decision that Google decided to leave their video streaming on with V6. They had so much faith during that 24-hour period. It set the course for what World V6 launch was. That traffic, as you can tell, gave us about a 3x jump in backbone bandwidth. But as you start looking at World V6 launch, start seeing different. And as you pull this graph apart, what you realize is that you have both a gradual rise, a couple of step functions, as various large websites, predominantly Facebook and Facebook cache images, starting to show up as a major source of V6 traffic. And that happened prior to World V6 launch date. Because launch date was not a 24-hour test, but was a be ready by this date. Now, the graph is actually very interesting because as we started to look at it, there was an absolute clear realization that there were end users using V6 as well as web operators, website content that was generating V6 traffic. And that is a good thing. It means that any argument that anybody has about whether there is content or whether there is eyeball is now truly dead. We're not talking about traffic like we were 3, 4, 5 years ago, which was very small, very trivial. Websites that were enabled V6 were very limited. That has all gone, and it should never, ever be discussed yet. But let's look at this last month since World V6 launch, and look at this graph, and you could say simply, well, we haven't seen this rate of growth. And actually, two things to that. One is, no, you haven't, because the idea of World V6 launch was to get things ready for 6th of June, which meant that lots of sites turned on for a short while, turned off, and then finally turned on and enabled more and more sites up until that day. But the second thing is, and I will describe this on the next page, the second thing is that as an IP backbone, we always expect internet peering, the ability for one network to talk to another, to improve over time. And it does. So we will see bandwidth lead off of our backbone, as will other operators, as networks increase their interconnectivity via internet peering points. And we talked about how V6 is enabled at internet exchange points now as pretty much a default. So we're also starting to see more and more peers outside of the core network, more and more peers enable V6. So that flattening of traffic, in fact, actually is very dramatic for us, but it's a good thing, and I'll explain that in the next slide. Next slide, please, Hisham. Okay, so you've seen these slides, these graphs before. Phil showed them, but I'm going to go pull them apart a little bit more. On the left-hand side is the V6 exchange in Frankfurt, Germany. It's a significant internet exchange, and it has V6 statistics that have been on its website for many years. It pulls apart all the core traffic and looks at purely the traffic that is marked as v6 only. And if you look at that graph, you will notice that, again, over the last year, fairly consistent, and then this rise that started to occur in April and May, and then a massive jump. And that massive jump occurred because as more traffic got enabled on the likes of Google or Facebook or other players, the traffic started to flow over that exchange point. But what also happened was that network engineers were able, as the traffic increased, to realize that they should look at the routing on their v6 network and make sure that routes are propagated and make sure that routes are efficient and following the appropriate path. It's very hard in the peering world to actually talk about who and what traffic flows between networks publicly, predominantly because peering agreements contain some form of simple non-disclosure that says you can't expose how much traffic is flowing between two parties to a third party. But I can be very generic and say that big spike in traffic was traffic that was flowing between a very large portal and between a network in East Europe that had about 1 million v6 CPE subscribers. And the network engineers realized that there was, in fact, private network internet, CNI's private peering, where the v6 traffic should have flown, but was not due to route tuning reasons. And that was fixed. It was fixed just before World v6 launch. So we saw this massive spike, but it gives you a great indication of just how much v6 traffic could potentially be flowing if one had access to some of that information. It also means that you have to remove that from the general upswing. And again, you see that general upswing. If you would ignore the spike in May, you see a general upswing on the AMSIC, also on the DK page. The green graph on the right-hand side is from AMSIC. Again, explaining this one and saying what really happened is quite interesting. You see an absolute upswing that occurs not over time, but more as then on that day. So we proved that there were still sites that enabled on the 6th of June. And you see a somewhat consistent amount of traffic. When we pulled this apart a little bit further, although we don't have enough data that are publicly available, what we did see was we saw v6 traffic again being tuned and optimized. World v6 launch provided an enormous amount of visibility towards operators to go back and look at their routing for v6, something they had not taken as seriously as they had during this day. So again, we saw some traffic move around. We think traffic moved over to London a little bit. We think traffic moved over to Frankfurt a little bit, again, when looking at European traffic. So this is a pretty consistent mindset as far as the v6 traffic is concerned. And as I said, we do intend to continue to see this type of traffic growth and optimizing of routing occurring all over the place. That's the end of the statistic slides, Hisham, that I have. There are some follow-up slides on hurricane electric, which I will leave just to throw up on the website, not bore anybody with today. But I appreciate the ability to share some of this, and obviously the Q&A can go into some of the more specific areas. I will make one point about statistics, that you have to be very careful where you're measuring from. And we know that we have a large enough amount of traffic that it's a very generic measurement, but it is not the same measurement, and it is a great complement to the traffic measurements that are available off of the ISOC website and off of some of the portals, because the reality is that when you're in the middle, you only see traffic that is destined or required to go through your own network. Whereas in the case of a portal, let's say of Google or Facebook, they are truly measuring them to everywhere else in the world. So all statistics are useful. Most important point is that they are definitely right. Hisham, thank you very much, and thank you for running through the slides. I do appreciate it.
No problem, Martin. Thank you for having you. We'll now go to our last speaker, which will be Paul. He'll give the iHub experience from Kenya on what they have been seeing prior and post World IPv6 launch. So, Paul, I'll give you the presenter role.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, I just need to see my slides. Right.
So, go next to agenda. You'll find the list of presentations. But bring up yours.
Okay, thank you so much. So, good afternoon, good morning, or from wherever you are, hello. I just want to say about the IPv6 experience that we've had at the iHub. And I will just give you just a short introduction of what the iHub really is. Compared to the previous presenters, we are a non-network operator. We're a technical community based in Nairobi, and it's also an innovation space whereby developers, entrepreneurs converge and they share ideas and they network. So in this year alone, the iHub went into partnership with the largest telecom operator in Kenya, that is Safaricom. Now, Safaricom have deployed IPv6 for the last 1 year, and one of my colleagues actually gave the Safaricom experience on deployment on this forum here. So concerning the iHub and Safaricom, Safaricom wanted to run a pilot program, that is to test IPv6, to see the feasibility, to actually find out how it will actually deploy to its end users. And the iHub was actually chosen because of basically we're very open-minded about technology, and we also take a lot of, we take a lot of risk in trying out new things. So we were the first client according to Safaricom. So this, on the 21st of May, up to the 31st of May, I conducted a 10-day pilot program with Safaricom network team. And during this period, I actually will show you in the next slide. I was given some parameters, you could say the IPv6 address block, the gateway, and the DNS settings, and I had to configure them in my router. So once I'd already tested and everything was working, I was able to actually communicate and even be able to reach to external websites and actually, we could say, external networks from the iHub. So the configuration basically at the iHub, which I forgot to mention, we actually have in total 40 megabits per second bandwidth. And basically what happened is, in the configuration, I used stateless address auto configuration Slack to actually distribute the IPv6 addresses dynamically to the end users. We actually did tests with DHCP6, and we found that it was not such a good implementation. Not many devices were able to actually implement DHCP6. So what we did is we tricked both Slack and DHCP6, and we are actually able to, let me show you in the next slide. So we're actually able to use the Slack to distribute the addresses and the DHCP6 to only advertise the DNS information. And like I mentioned, DHCP6 on our side was not fully supported. In macro effects, especially Snow Leopard, I had to actually put the settings manually for the DNS because it was not tracking DHCP6. But for most clients to be able to receive Slack information, and once we had done our tests, the protocol syncs and actually worked seamlessly. what we did is we actually tested before the World IPv6 Day. There was this IPv6-test.com. I think it was to test whether you're ready for the World IPv6 launch, and actually many devices that I came across were able to connect to IPv6 and are able to actually get to the internet through IPv6. And we did participate in the launch, and it was quite successful, and I was able to demonstrate how the IPv6 is actually working here at the iHub. So once June 6th, after June 6th, what is the way forward, and what do we envisage to do with the protocol? So my colleagues at the East Africa Network Operators Group and I would like to actually start training and sensitizing people, especially network engineers, because these are the key people who will actually be enforced with deployment. In the most cases, they're the frontmen and frontwomen. So we like to actually train them and actually put all our resources on the website. I'll share with you the link to the website shortly. Another thing is also we would like to encourage developers in our technical community to actually try IPv6, simply maybe by just running an app, maybe on Apache or any web server, and be able to access it without actually bothering about implementing the protocol. Another area that we like to look at is IPv6 security. I've read a few RFCs that security on IPv6 is not watertight as such, so we like to actually look into those aspects and see what we can do with it. Other than that, I will be glad to share with you the website. So the current IPv6 test site for the iHub is ipv6.ihub.co.ke. I intend probably within the year to actually get now the full domain ihub.co.ke on IPv6. And for our East Africa Network Operators Group, it's enog.org. So those are the two sites that were up and running as in preparation for World IPv6 Day. And with that, thank you so much. I would be glad to take your questions.
Okay, thank you, Paul, and thank you to all our presenters for their presentations. I'd like to now to open the floor for Q&As. I would, however, request there's a small hand next to under the participants' names. If anybody that has a question, if they can raise that hand by click on it, and that way we can have some kind of a queue for questions or answers. Or if you cannot participate via audio, you can always type in your question on chat, and I'll be more than happy to read it out to the rest of the participants. So, any questions? Any follow-up questions from any of the participants? Okay, well, until somebody comes up with any questions, I would like to ask a question myself. And my question would be to ISOC or Phil. How do you see the next step? I mean, we did IPv6 Day last year. We did World IPv6 launch, and things are turned on. Is there a next step? And if so, what would that be?
Yeah, I guess the question is, will there be a World IPv6 something or other next year? I don't know. I don't. Let me give you a little perspective on this. It would be hard to follow what happened this year. You know, this year was seen as a kickoff date for the really major web content, and you know, I don't know that people will wait now for something else to happen to turn up their V6 if they're a big website operator. You know, we've talked to website operators who are, you know, not the top 4, we've got the top 4 covered, but who are, you know, operators of really large websites, and they're working about as fast as they can to get something turned up. So I think for a website, you know, they're just going to be turning it up as quickly as they can. For networks, you know, we've heard similar from very large networks around the world. You know, people have said, you know, this incented us to move faster, or this incented us to move along, and we're going to be turning up IPv6 for our users as quickly as we can. So by doing the measurements through the end of this year, we're going to do them the first Wednesday of, or the second Wednesday of the month in August, September, October, November, and December. And what I hope that we will see is more networks added to the list who are turning up IPv6 for their end users, and we'll see growth of the percentages of the networks that are already on the list as they continue to roll out IPv6 on a larger scale. So I'm not sure exactly, you know, what could be done that would incent people more than they are already incented, and would cause those traffic graphs to grow more than they are already growing. I think that, you know, this is enough impetus. It's enough to say, look, you know, big websites are doing this, big networks are doing this. It's time for us to do this as well. So, so we see continuing the measurements through the end of this year. We hope it will capture people who weren't able to make it by the 6th of June this year, and we'll show some increasing numbers for the rest of this year, but I'm not sure that we will have another World IPv6 something next year. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, more or less. But may I suggest that something that was also mentioned to me, more focus probably on the last mile and the CPE parts, now that we've got ISPs and content? Just a thought.
Okay.
Well, I would like to relay back a message I got from Mark Elkins privately. He said that Mark Elkins runs an ISP in South Africa, and he already signed up for the ISOC's ISP heat map.
Yeah, thanks for posting the link there. If you go there, there's something about completing a survey form. There will be some links about completing a survey form, and that's how you actually contribute your information. If you have any difficulty, there's an email address you can send a message to, and we'll respond to that as well.
Okay. My other question will probably go to Christian. Christian, we heard the examples of Uganda and Senegal. And the question I always also hear from Orange, and I've relayed this back to you, when can we see that those pilots being deployed on a larger scale and the rest of the Oranges here in Africa?
So this is Christian speaking. Generally speaking, I usually present the group's IPv6 program into some kind of two-stage bucket, if you will. The first stage consists in documenting the IPv6 strategy, in a sense how we will introduce IPv6 capabilities into our networking and service infrastructures. And the second stage consists in helping the different group affiliates in organizing their IPv6 projects. So for the second phase, which aims basically at actually deploying IPv6 in the existing networking and service infrastructures, and therefore provide IPv6 connectivity to our customers, be they residential or corporate, be they fixed or mobile customers, we usually rely upon two major inputs. One, the first input is the actual consolidation of the global IPv4 address depletion. And this is something which is seen as obviously one of the major milestones for most of the IPv6 projects that have been launched so far, especially in Europe, but to some extent in Africa as well. And the second input is the organization of the IPv6 audit, which aims at not only assessing the introduction of IPv6 from a technical standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint, so as to have a better idea of how much it will cost for each and every group affiliate, depending on their own market coverage, their business development perspectives, how it will cost to actually introduce IPv6. So I would say the African case is quite special from our perspective, because obviously, and you know that better than me, the AFRINIC is very likely to be the last regional internet registry to lack global IP4 address blocks, presumably sometime in 2015, 2016. So actually, the global IPv4 address depletion itself is probably not the major driver for the organization of IPv6 projects in our African group affiliates. And yet, we've got now, if I'm not mistaken, we've got now more than 10 IPv6 projects that have been ignited in Africa. So I've already mentioned the case of Senegal, Uganda, but we've got Orange Kenya, Tunisia, Morocco, Mauritius, and the thing is that for all these colleagues, what we very much insist on is the ability for these group affiliates to make sure that their customers will be able to actually access any part of the internet, including these regions of the internet where IPv6 only reachable contents begin to appear, especially thinking about what's going on in the Asian Pacific region. And obviously, for those customers, we want to make sure, especially those customers that include sometimes large Asian communities in these African countries, we want to make sure that they can obviously access IPv6 reachable contents. So that's one of the major drivers. And the other drivers being the ability to globally anticipate the global internet evolution, especially thinking about those corporate customers who want to make sure that they will be able to develop their business with regions where global IPv4 address depletion has already become a reality. So based upon that kind of drivers, we encourage our colleagues from the different African affiliates to organize their IPv6 project as soon as possible. And to be more precise and to better answer to your question, the plan is, for example, in Senegal to open the IPv6 service for their ADSL customers next year. And the IPv6 VPN service offering is actually available in Senegal, and one of the very first customers were the Senegalese academics. We are currently working, I will have a phone conference with my colleagues from Orange Kenya tomorrow morning to discuss the major milestones, but the plan for them is also to make sure that their network infrastructure will be IPv6 ready at the end of this year, and that they will be able to open the IPv6 VPN service offerings for something like 150 corporate customers at the same time or early next year. But in other countries, for example, the discussions that we had last week with my colleagues from Morocco in Meditel, we organized a two-day IPv6 workshop where we first focused on their mobile customers because this is where they foresee the very first IPv4 address depletion situations, but this is not something which will happen before presumably 2015, and yet they have decided to ignite an IPv6 project and hopefully launch a field trial sometime next year, especially because they are interested in enforcing the NAT64 design that we recommend for their mobile customers, because they also plan to provide some of their customers with IPv6 enabled dongle technology to access the internet from a smartphone. So as you can see, there is no one-size-fits-all answer to your question. It basically depends on on the market coverage, the business development perspectives in each and every African country, affiliate or partner. And it also depends on how they see the evolution of the internet. But the thing is that we plan to welcome additional African colleagues in the IPv6 network planning, if you will, for the next month to come. And hopefully next year should be the year where you will see more IPv6 services provided by some of the group's affiliates available.
Thank you for that answer, Christian. I'd like to ask a final question, which I know Martin has always asked. But Martin, is it possible to get tunnels from Hurricane Electric to test IPv6?
Too easy a question. Yes, the tunnel broker service very much, let's say, in demand, and I have to admit that the demand goes up every time, whether we did World v6 day or launch. The thing that may be more appropriate is that we do tunnels for BGP connections as well. And these are great ways of temporarily bringing up connectivity should your upstream provider not be ready for V6. But I do make the comment about tunnels, and I repeat it even more so these days, that we would be very happy when the last tunnel gets turned off on our tunnel broker service. It isn't happening anytime soon, and it will take quite some time before we get to this point. But we have regularly encouraged users who have native or starting to get native V6 service to let go of their tunnels and just live on a native world, because it is a much better environment to live on. Tunnelbroker.net, there's an option for standard tunnel, there's an option for BGP tunnels as well. And there's always support available via the email address that's on that website. Thank you for the question.
Well, if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank everybody that participated on the webinar, and I hope to see you soon in our next webinar. Thank you very much.